Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work as a school-based counselor at a school in Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Friends, I'm calling it audible. The question about why the University of Arizona added early action will get pushed back to next week. I decided to run part 2 and part 3 of the question our listeners sent in last week as one entire 70-minute segment. So today you'll hear that question and a brand new interview I'm very excited about is with Greg Zaiser, Chief Enrollment Officer at Elon, a 36-year veteran of Elon. And he's helping us understand how Elon uses demonstrated interest and why Elon uses demonstrated interest. You'll hear part 1 of 2 today.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, last week was an interesting week. I normally hear back from like 5 to 7 of you after every podcast, and the feedback's extremely helpful. This last week, I heard from like 12 to 15 listeners. The first 3 or 4 that came in were all very positive, mostly from school-based counselors, a couple IECs, and a parent. But by the end of the week, there were more negative responses than positive ones, and that really never happens. All of the concerns expressed were from the IEC community. So I went back and listened to the episode again, and I do want to apologize for my poor choice of words at several parts in section 1. I never want any IEC to feel discouraged, devalued, or disheartened. And this is not a, if you felt offended, I apologize. I genuinely believe I said some things that understandably were deflating and dismissive to IECs, and for that, I am sorry. That was never my intention. I wish I could tell you I handled everyone who reached out to me and gave me constructive feedback well, but the more aggressive ones probably didn't feel listened to. But 2 spoke to me in a way that really helped me to hear them. I don't know if that's a character flaw on my part or if that's human nature, but when people come at me with aggression, I tend not to be as responsive. I'm doing some reflection on that, but it really made a difference how people approached me, whether I was able to hear them. I spoke to Julia this morning, and she also wishes she said some things differently. You may recall at the start of the podcast, I called this question a beast of a question. I called this question the hardest question I get. I said when I wrote my book, 171 Answers, it was the hardest chapter for me to write of the 171 chapters. And I'm talking about the relationship between IECs and school-based counselors. At times, I'm not sure if I have the verbal dexterity to do the question full justice. So I put off answering it for 5 to 6 months before we finally tackled it here. When I talk with IECs sometimes, I feel like they don't respect a high school discouraging their students from working with an IEC in a way that I think that sometimes they should understand. I think you can make a compelling case that this position is student-centric. But you can also make the case that it's not student-centric. It's very complicated. It's very nuanced. In supporting the listener who sent in the question about the school, I in no way, shape, or form meant to malign IECs. You may not always agree with me, and I hope if you listen to all 700 hours of content from me or anyone else, you won't agree with anybody. That just shows you're a thinking person, and that's commendable. But I will always be sincere with you. That's my promise. You'll always get my honesty. I feel I worked off an assumption that I'm an IEC. There are more IECs than CBO counselors, public counselors, private counselors as co-hosts on this podcast. I started Counselors Connect. I asked an IEC if they'd be my co-leader. And there are more IECs than any other type of counselors in that group. I assume that everyone knows that I respect and support the work that an IEC does. And when I said to Julia in the first part of the episode, Julia, you worked with me seamlessly for 5 or 6 students. I thought what I was communicating when I said that to our listeners was, see, an IEC can work with a school-based counselor in a way that's constructive, and it can go well. I certainly wasn't saying I'm the only one who can do this. And I specifically asked Julia to answer this question with me because we could model, hopefully, that an IEC and a school-based counselor can work together. But I heard from enough IECs, including some of our own co-hosts, to know I didn't effectively strike that balance I was trying to reach. I said to a few counselors, please listen to all 3 segments before you judge. Some people appreciated that and received that well, others did not. Anyway, after thinking about it, I decided to run all of part 2 and all of part 3 together in one 65 to 70 minute segment. Another mistake I made was cutting off part 1 where I cut it off. I just went to like the 25-minute mark and just cut it off without thinking of the context and where I was breaking the episode. And that was naive and that was a mistake. I should have run the whole entire segment as one long podcast, especially because of how complicated and nuanced this topic is. I had one goal, and that was to try to help IECs to understand the perspective from a school-based counselor and to try to help school-based counselors understand the perspective of an IEC so that we can all support our students and work together more harmoniously. The 2 groups are often divided, not at public schools or modestly selective private schools, but at the most selective private schools. Places like where I worked or like where Julia works, where her entire caseload is only 26 students, not in the hundreds. Anyway, let's transition to the question again. And I hope segment 2 and segment 3 land in a way that do not deflate, discourage, or dishearten any IEC or any school-based counselor. I hope each counselor leaves with a greater understanding of the other counselor so that they can serve the kids they work with more effectively.
Hi, Mark. I was listening to episode 514, where you discussed when a student should start the college process. Around minute 25, you mentioned families at independent or private schools who are getting great counseling but might still find value in working with a college coach. You hinted that this could be a tricky issue that you had some do's and don'ts about, but weren't going to delve into those since it wasn't the focus of the episode. I'm hoping you can address this topic in a future episode. My son attends a small independent school with about 60 students per grade, and the school has 2 experienced college counselors. However, these counselors have very strongly advised against hiring an independent counselor or SA support, stressing their credentials and experience and citing concerns about it complicating their work, questioning the financial investment, and saying it could make the process harder. That said, after presenting these caveats, they've suggested that if we do decide to pursue outside help, we should definitely let them know. While I understand their concerns, I hesitate to bring it up directly because I worry it might be seen as a lack of trust in their expertise. My son has ADHD and executive function challenges, and I feel he could really benefit from the support of an independent counselor for college essay support, particularly in managing the writing process. We'd appreciate any tips on how to approach this situation effectively. Specifically, we're looking for advice on how to balance doing what's best for our son while maintaining a positive, collaborative relationship with the school counselors who will ultimately be doing the bulk of the college counseling work, including being responsible for writing recommendation letters and determining which students at our small school to recommend to which colleges. Thank you for your wonderful podcast, and I look forward to hearing your insights.
But it's hard because just like there are IECs that are so green they don't know what they're talking about, you and I have talked about this. Like, not all school-based counselors are that well trained either, and so there's some scary stuff that happens there too. And so, as a family, you just want what's best for your kid. That's all you care about.
You do. Yes, I agree. And the other thing that I think was so helpful for us working together too is like we share different backgrounds, and it was like I am much more effective counselor. So if listeners don't know, I'm a non-Black person. If I'm counseling exclusively, we counsel Black children together. Like I would much rather Mark is in the room with me because, and I'm red as white and look very white. Like I also wouldn't listen to me if I don't share the same background, right? So I also think, and I think this is where school-based counselors, and I fail as well too, is that inclusivity and belonging is not well represented when you've got an independent school and you've got college counselors. You'd be hard pressed to find a predominantly white institution where the majority of the college counseling team is all Latinx and African American or Black folks. And so, but then we have students at these schools that are part of those groups. And I do think sometimes it can be more effective to have a counselor that better understands who you are.
One thing that I would say that schools need to seriously think of, I've seen a big improvement in the last 10 to 15 years, but it's still not where it needs to be. Usually the family that hires an IEC, they want to start doing this stuff usually in the 10th grade.
Yeah, that's also very true. Yes.
And a lot of schools are set up to start this process in January of the junior year.
Yep.
That is not working. That is not going to work for a lot of people. They're hoping to have maybe taken 2 or 3 trips across the country to visited schools by the time the process worked. And I never fully understood that until I went to the school-based side, and I was so busy with my current seniors to be able to have the time and attention to really give to juniors or sophomores. And some schools are doing a better job now, at least doing like workshops or group sessions than I used to see 15 or 20 years ago. But I really think if school-based counseling wants to see less IECs, they cannot be starting this process January of the junior year. It's just not going to work for families that are hoping to travel and visit schools.
So interestingly, yes. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you this, all 3 schools I've worked at, we've done something like that for that exact reason. And also research, to be clear, research shows when you're coming from a first generation background or financial aid will be part of your college process, you do want to start early, right? Because that is a whole nother process and on-ramp that is not as advantageous as for some of my, 4th generation PhDs, very wealthy students, right? And also, I'll say this, a lot of independent schools, as much as a lot of students go to these schools for the college process, the college office is not at all in the top 10 priorities for the school. So it is often hard for us to get programming, to get space, to get time that you're looking for. But we need to strike a balance between providing enough information so that you're ready to go when it's ready to ramp up, but not too much so that you've really had a lot of anxiety and misspent your time in investing and figuring out who you are in those first 2 years of high school.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because I want to make it clear, like I'm not a fan of like going full-blown college counseling as soon as you walk into the high school door. But I think there's a big difference between, let's say, May of your sophomore year, like pretty much at the halfway point, and January of the junior year, like to be able to strategically use your rising summer and figure some things out and do some things like, and also you could even do some group stuff too, like some groups. And some schools do it, they'll do like, once a semester meeting with parents or meeting with students and do some, it doesn't have to be all one-on-one. I just think that's one thing that would help because, the culture has just changed and starting January. Like I cannot tell you how many times people have reached out to me because their process starts so late at their local school.
Absolutely.
And I would like to be able to get on some campuses and do some visiting because I'm not the go hardcore right in ninth, but I am a believer. Like, let's say if you start this process halfway through high school, like I usually say, I want 80% of your apps, your early apps, ED, rolling or EA, 80% by Labor Day, and the last 20% by October 10th.
Right. So it's not really even senior year you have.
Right. So that's like a 15 to 16 months if we're talking end of sophomore year. There's a lot to do in that, including trying to just figure out the schools you want to apply to.
Right.
But anyway, I don't want to put it back on the schools. I think that it's just such a complicated thing. It's case by case. I do think that in general, I do think that a lot of school-based counselors, especially at some of the more selective schools where they hire people that have had a lot of experience, I don't feel they're respected like they should be respected for the professionals that they are and the knowledge that they have. But I also see such a range across the wide range of schools that you can't just like you can't put all IECs in one bucket, you can't put all school-based in one bucket either.
Yeah, totally.
Because there are also schools that just hire that mom who worked with their kid and flip them into that role.
Yeah.
And they're brand new, you know? And sometimes that person after 15 or 20 years can build up some knowledge and they've been through lots and lots and lots of classes.
Totally.
But if it's a combination of, like, I've worked with like 20, 30 kids or something, and I'm in year 2 or 3, that's pretty rough. So I don't know, Julia. I don't know how much we've helped. It's so complicated.
No.
What have we not talked about?
I guess as much as I just want to be clear, like, not all IECs are bad. I just think I would really lean into your school's warnings, because I don't think they would be that fervent or clear if they hadn't had experiences like I had, where they're very sure this is probably not going to be in your best interest. Again, with the, but I would say very different if you are looking for hand holding and you're looking for executive functioning support. I absolutely think that makes sense to partner a person like that with your school-based counselor. But I would say that, like, they're not really like blowing smoke, and they're not really just saying that because they don't like working with IECs and they feel like you're just going to knock them down. They're likely coming from a place because, and in fact, I would actually encourage anyone to go look at any independent school, and pretty often you see on their college counseling website some kind of statement about, we don't think you need to engage in IEC. So, like, it is very much out there. So if you are feeling like literally my child is underserved, if they've got experience and whatnot, you probably do not need to engage in IEC unless you would like some more support with the executive functioning pieces.
I mean, and you know, you mentioned essay help if they're not doing that.
Yeah. That'd be nuts. I can't believe what would I do with my time if I didn't offer essay help?
You know.
But I've heard it.
I think for some people, there are a decent number of people that are just 10-month employees and they don't work over the summers.
Yeah.
And that's hard for people to not have access
to somebody. I don't know a single office that doesn't have some sort of support now. I will be honest. I worked at a school where the office was closed, but there was always somebody to answer questions and turn.
But I think keep in mind, you're in Massachusetts in a very like high-powered environment. True. It's not like that. Like, it's very, like, I'm talking about like all independent schools across. All independent schools across the whole country. They're not like, it's a very common thing. Okay. I don't work in the summers. I don't work after 5.
Yeah.
And like, those are things people appreciate. They appreciate being able to do a 10 o'clock call or a Sunday call or stuff over the summers.
Totally.
So those are some of the other things that I would say on that side of the ledger.
Yeah.
I do think, though, on the school side, that local school knowledge is really, really important. I don't always feel it's respected like it should be. The school knowledge in the school context.
Yeah.
You know, that is really, really valuable. And especially if you're dealing with like professionals who really know their stuff. So it's case by case. I remember being school-based and someone getting an IEC on me, and I didn't like it either.
Yeah. Well, also, you should also pay attention to the demographics of the school-based counselors who most often get IECs. It is women, people of color, and younger people. So, like, I've even had, like, I've seen somebody who never worked in admissions or college counseling be an older white guy who somehow got a job in college counseling, and the family will much more listen to them than they would listen to me, for example.
Well, I think the only thing that I might disagree with you on, but I also think maybe if I've had your experience, my view might be different. I still feel like if I was back on the school side, that I would try to, if you're going to have an IC, I want to talk. I still think, because I want to know what they're saying and what's being fed to my student.
Yeah.
I really feel I would say that, but I know based on some experiences you've had, they're telling people stuff that's not true and the family's believing it.
Yeah.
I think if I'd had that experience like you have, I don't know if that might change my mind. I don't know. But
I ask all my students and
Yeah.
then I say, I just want to know because I'd like to work with them.
Yeah,
And
so you do it too.
I just want to know so that way I don't make you feel like you're in a bad position. So if their IEC says yes, so like I had just 26 students in the fall. I worked with 3 IECs on a regular basis for these students. So like I have no problem collaborating. Like it was a great experience with 2 of them. I had one who had been an IEC for 20 years who didn't know Stanford had restrictive early action, for example. So like I was like, yep, we got to pull back those applications that you had the student submit because they're not allowed to submit those. But,
yeah. So, I mean, what is our bottom line for our listener? One of yours is I would respect a school if they're saying that.
Yep.
I think that's fair.
Yep.
Are there any other like general takeaways?
I think, and maybe not for the question asker, but more for like the IECs and the school-based counselors that listen, is that I think like it is what it is, and there's a lot of feelings and politics about this, and I think it's just easier if you just try to have a working relationship with each other if you can, because it's better for the student. Like I said, I don't know of any office I've worked with that says like no engagement with IECs whatsoever. It's kind of a counselor to counselor basis, but I think at the very minimum that if your child doesn't, if you do have an IEC, I just think it is better to let your college counselor know, perhaps like, hey, I am getting support. I'm getting some help with X, Y, and Z. I could really use support from you on X, Y, and Z when we meet. Something like that just communicates to the college counselor like, hey, I'm going to use our time together well in the way I think it's going to be great. And I've got some outside support where I can use that time well. And I'm not redundant for anyone here. And I'm not, I feel like I'm caught in the middle. So I also would say that if you are going to get an outside counselor and perhaps your high school is not really amenable to that, just have very clear boundaries between what you're going to work with your school-based counselor and what you might work with your IEC. And I would prioritize the things that probably make a little more sense to work with your school-based counselor or IEC, right? Like, writing about, a dip in your grades might need a little help from your counselor, whereas writing about like what brings you joy is probably something an IEC can really help you with. Like,
yeah. I think there's the lack of communication and the lack of mutual respect is a lot of the problem.
Yeah, totally.
It's a lot of the problem. It's not all of the problem, but it's a lot of it. Because, you've identified a lot of issues, which is people with bad advice, people who don't know what they're talking about, people who undermine the school counselor. Those are all real issues, as well. But I know I've just seen it work well, and not just with you.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why I know that it can work well. But when I think about like even like how we work, think about it, Julie. If we weren't communicating with each other, it would not have worked like it did. If I was siloed and I was talking to the students and you were siloed, like that would have still created some problems.
Yeah. I do think it was helpful that we were always on with the parents together and the student on together. Or in like the off chance I'd catch the student in the hall and it was something like kind of important, I'd shoot you an email or something like.
And sometimes somebody does have an area of expertise.
Yeah.
Like, for example, we've talked about Kevin with the international stuff. Someone might have really, expertise with whatever, working with conservatories or art students or financial stuff. I know you've used me sometimes in those capacities and some of that.
Oh, stuff. I've used you for many pieces of your expertise. A lot.
But I know that, I don't know. I think it really comes down to communication and healthy respect.
Yeah.
Because I was saying to every one of those kids, Julia knows the school context. She knows the school context. Like, you've got to listen to what she's saying about the school context. And then you and I were communicating about the kids and about the schools. And I think that's why, because think about it, like we never had like one scintilla of friction ever with any of those kids.
No.
What's hard for me sometimes is how do I handle it if it feels like the school's policy is that they don't really want somebody working with an IEC.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's really hard for me because, like, I want to be respectful of their process.
Right.
but I also feel like I bring value.
Totally.
So, and then doesn't a family have a right to make that decision themselves if they want to?
Right.
So that gets really difficult. So usually my work around there is just to constantly give people tips of how they can work most effectively with their school counselor. Like get in there and see them, listen to them, find out their communication, listen to what schools are like, constantly going back to them. What does your school counselor think on this? What is your school? That's a question for your. That's kind of my way to sort of support them from the distance. But I don't know.
No good answers.
No, but I think hopefully there's people can extract some nuggets. And at the end of the day, I think people have to do what they're at peace with. You know, are you more at peace about like you're missing out and not helping your kid? Or are you more at peace with this feels a little sneaky and I'm skirting the rules?
Right.
What is your heart telling you? I don't know. That's maybe overly simple, but you know, I think we can't like solve world peace on this one.
Sadly.
Thanks, Julia, as always.
Thank you. And thank you for all the lovely IECs you've introduced me to as well.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And I have to thank you because, you know, you've introduced me to a lot of your colleagues over the years who I have loved. I've done, because remember in some cases you weren't always the primary. Other people sometimes were the primary.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I've got to meet some of your others and we work together just really awesomely too. And so.
Totally.
Yeah. So it works both ways. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you.
Hey, Julia.
Hi, Mark.
So friends, this is part 3 of the series we're doing on IECs and school-based counselors at independent schools. But what I want you to know is this third segment was actually not recorded at the same time as the first 2. What happened was Julie and I got off the conversation and we hopped on the phone and we started talking. And we kind of felt like, I don't know if we were completely fair to IECs in that previous conversation. And this is like literally right after we recorded the first 2. And so I would throw something out. And then Julie was like, yeah, we should have said this. And she threw something out. I'm like, yeah, we should have said that. So we decided to record a third part where we want to just explore some of the nuances that we don't feel we fully captured. And then I just really want to kind of get into some really frank and honest conversation about why is there so much tension between school-based counselors and IECs? Because there very much is, especially at more selective independent schools. And the goal is to sort of help each side, hopefully, to understand the other side. And there's no motive other than that. Like, I was a school-based counselor exclusively for 14 years, public school and CBO. And then I worked with Susan as an adjunct for another 8. And I've been an IEC. This is now my 16th year. So it's just, when I'm with IECs, I feel there's massive misunderstandings of school-based counselors. And when I'm with school-based counselors, I feel like there's misunderstandings of IECs. So we're just trying to bring both together and help each other understand each other for the sake of the kids so we can all help the kids better. So Julia, let's talk about the very first thing that we said when we got on the phone. I remember you made the comment, if you have the resources and you love your kid, why would you not want to do everything possible for your kid? And if you feel that means hiring an IEC, like, why would you not want to do that? It's better than spending the money on whatever, $20,000 summer vacation or yacht or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So tell me what your thoughts were on that. See if you can remember, because we talked for quite a while after the recording on this topic. Anything you want to say on that topic?
Yeah, I think in maybe sort of leaning into that tension, I just wanted to bring it back to the caller, right? And about families. And because really the question really is about how do I best support my student, right? And I do, and if I take myself out of all I know about independent schools or really well-resourced areas, that I think it is a very normal and perhaps really loving sentiment from a parent to think, I want my child's going to college and I want to do everything I can to help them with that. Right. So I understand that desire is very real and honest. And I also think we talked about too, sometimes I have parents who might have the means to do that, but
haven't decided to engage an IEC, and then will notice all of their students' friends' parents have done that, or their students' friends have IECs in addition, and then start to worry, oh no, what am I not doing to show up as a supportive, strong parent, right? When the perception is everyone else is doing this, so shouldn't I do this too to support my child as best as possible? So I just really want to acknowledge that is a very real, there's nothing wrong with wanting to gauge an IEC. And I think it does make sense for a whole lot of people, but I just wanted to say for the caller and anyone else that has those feelings, I think there's nothing wrong with wanting to entertain or think about or hire an IEC. I do think it comes from a place of wanting to support your child as best as possible.
Sometimes I experience this even as an IC, Julia. Like somebody will hire me. They'll even sign up for a comprehensive package that has all the writing and everything involved. But then they'll go hire a separate person to do essay work, And then, of course, they'll have the separate person for test prep. And then sometimes they have the trainer for their sport. And they have multiple people as part of their team.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I still experience it that way. And, I have to say to myself, well, this is really motivated by their love for their kid. Like they could, not to repeat myself, but they could go get a Ferrari or Maserati or whatever, right? Like they could just blow it all on a crazy expensive car, and they're just trying to put it into their kid. And that's something that I always try to remember, and keep in mind. You did bring up something else that's really important. We were trying to address a caller's question, and the caller very specifically was bringing up the point that they're being told by their private school that we don't necessarily think this is a good thing. And so
Right.
we were responding directly to that. And I think that's important to know that context and to try to help people maybe to understand why a school counselor might say that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I think it is important to bring that up. Like we were specifically referring to a specific caller with a specific question about a concern. But let's talk about the other thing that we said after the call, and we kind of agreed. I don't know if we were fair to ICs in that conversation. We talked about the fact that was just going, reflecting on all the reasons people hire IECs. And sometimes people feel like their school-based perspective is a little bit of an echo chamber. And sometimes they see value. I just kind of want to get a perspective outside of my immediate milieu.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember you saying, and that's valid. Like you see validity to that. Anything that you want to say about that?
Yeah, I absolutely. It's like, you get a second opinion sometimes when you've gone to see the doctor or something, like, and sometimes you go with that second opinion. Sometimes you just want to know, right? I think especially, and if you think about it, we use the internet that way, right? Like I doubt I have ever worked with a single student who hasn't then gone and looked up what we've talked about, right? So it's sort of the same vein, right? Just trying to see and maybe also in a different kind of relationship too. I have some students, I love all of my students. There are some I just easily connect to from the get, just maybe we have similar, ideas or values. And then our relationship grows, but I can totally understand that in that interim time, maybe someone just wants to see a different flavor, get a little more information, talk to someone else.
The other thing that we talked about that I think we touched on this, but maybe not as much as we could, is there are IECs with specialized knowledge. Like you talked about it. You gave a few examples, like you brought up the point of executive functioning. We talked about that. You talked about it was talking more in the context of me, but like my knowledge of Atlanta, or my knowledge of the Black community. You talked about that. Kevin is someone who we rely all the time on with his knowledge of international schools, and as an IEC that we love and is on our team, but we support him. But there's a lot of others too that we probably didn't talk about. Like there's people with specialized knowledge in homeschooling.
Yep.
There's people with really specialized knowledge on the arts process.
Yes.
Like conservatories and performances and auditions and portfolios, both visual and on the performing side.
Yes. I'm sure you have too, but and I'm very grateful for this. I've had a couple students go for a BFA, in some kind of performance art and, or, music or theater. And I know what the process is. I don't know the first thing about preparing for Carnegie Mellon's vocal thing. And so really helpful to work with somebody who is specialized in that so that I could focus on the essays and things I knew about the process, but then my student was really supported in the ultimate goal of getting a BFA.
Yeah, and we've tried to have some of those experts on our podcast. There's also people that have very specialized knowledge on the athletics process and maybe
Totally.
even like in a sport
Yeah.
that
Big
I may
time.
not have knowledge in, or a school-based counselor may not have knowledge in. So I find myself as an IEC, sometimes saying this person has like all they do is place water polo players and call like that's their whole thing. They have that kind of specialized knowledge like that. You mentioned executive functioning, but just sometimes there's lots of other learning differences as well
Yeah.
that come into play, and people might have specialized knowledge. And so, we touched on that a little bit, but I don't think we sort of covered all the different areas. And we haven't done it here either, where people have specialized knowledge in an area that they're maybe able to bring to the table. I emphasized a lot avail people starting early, people that want to start early, or people that want to meet you at 10 at night or want to meet on a Sunday, or there are a lot of ICs that don't do summer work. I know that's not true like in your circle, but there are around the country. I mean school-based
Oh,
that are only 10-month
absolutely. Yeah.
employees, 10-month employees.
Yeah. And I worked at one school where we used to be closed all summer. And so, and I very much sure that that's where a decent amount of traction picked up for getting support. Right. So that's also very true. I don't want to work. Well, I think everyone knows I go to bed before 10 o'clock at night anyway. So you don't want my help at 10 o'clock at night.
So yeah, so those are just some of the things that we didn't cover that, Julie and I talked about in our post conversation that's when we said, let's do a part 3. Originally it was a part 2. I also want to just explore, because I think this can be helpful. I'll talk to a group of IECs, and like I'm an IEC. I love the profession. I love the people. I love the people that I meet. I mean, Counselors Connect has 50 or 60 in there, maybe more, and I'm at conferences. I'm in groups with IECs and school-based. I do feel there's a misunderstanding IECs have of school-based. And when I'm with school-based, I feel like there's misunderstandings that school-based have of IECs. And it's a real tension.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do want to kind of see if we can unpack it, because maybe if each side can understand the other side, there'll be potential for working better together, which will just benefit the kids. But before we get into that, I really can't emphasize enough that the term independent school gets used broadly, but they're very different types of independent schools.
Yep.
Well, and before we even get to that, let's just talk about public school. Most public schools, I mean, an IEC is incredibly helpful and oftentimes welcomed
Yes.
by the public school counselor, because I got 400 kids on my caseload.
Right.
If you can help with 20 of these kids or 10 or 5, then that's just some work off my plate, and I can, spend more time on others. And so a lot of times they love it. Like they'll let you come in and do presentations and things like that. So that's the public school. But then you also have, and I realize there are exceptions with this, but in general, I would say a lot of Christian schools, a lot of Catholic schools, and a lot of less selective independent schools. They're also different because they're not necessarily hiring like an admissions pro.
Right.
They might take a teacher and promote them or something, or just a really nice, pleasant person. And so then they don't necessarily have somebody with the admissions background. And so in those cases, a lot of times the IEC is more knowledgeable than the school counselor in those cases. And in many cases, they also welcome collaboration. So what a lot of our communication was kind of like the 1 or 2% of the most selective independent schools. because what they do is they most of the time, not always, hire like an admission professional who really understands admissions and has been in the trenches and has a lot of knowledge. It doesn't mean they know everything. We talked about some of the areas they don't have knowledge sometimes, but I do find, this is just my experience, and I'll give some background here. I have not done college admissions for 35 years, and when I did it, like, I was at a non-selective school, and I really don't remember anything from that other than be very careful about working in a place that has financial issues. That's like my big takeaway. So I'm not coming from the prism of myself. And yeah, I did boarding school admissions, but that's like small liberal arts, but there's some differences. And even that is now 16 years ago. So I'm not like putting myself up on a pedestal when I say this, but my experience is like when I talk to someone who has done admissions for a decent amount of time at a highly selective school, and if they've also done counseling, those are the most knowledgeable people that I talk to about college admissions. Like it is difficult to get that knowledge. Even take someone like Hillary. I knew Hillary before she did college admissions. Now going into year 5, her knowledge and breadth of admissions is very difficult to get that just off the counseling side, unless maybe you've just done it for a couple decades and maybe, really, really long time. Even still, you'll have gaps in your background that you kind of get when you've been in the trenches like that.
Right.
There are things that Hillary will bring up sometimes, and I'm like, I didn't know that, and I would have known that if I would have been doing admissions in a highly selective school within the last 5 to 10 years. And so that knowledge is incredibly valuable. And I don't always think it's understood how valuable it is to actually have that experience.
I also think too, there is a huge network among independent school counselors, and that can include too, like I will sometimes have interaction with some independent school counselors at the schools you mentioned earlier, Mark, that are like, hi, I'm new to this role. We don't have a large college going population. It's mostly regional if people go. So here I am trying to learn from other people. We have a vast network. There's also the Association of College Counseling Professionals, independent schools. So we do, as much as one thing I love about learning from IECs is I do get a really global perspective. But while school-based counselors might have extreme understanding of their school and then the colleges their students apply to, we also really learn from one another at very different independent schools and sort of and trade a lot of knowledge that way too. So what's also nice is the school-based counseling community is not guarding their information. They are readily sharing with one another, and there's really helpful listservs and resources where even if I have a student that needed a very specific type of horseback riding at a very specific size school, and that was not my wheelhouse and not something I could easily necessarily research on my own. I had about 5 counselors from independent schools I've never heard of all across the country chime in with really helpful information that I would have never gotten otherwise.
Yeah. So Julia, I did not talk about some of the stuff I'm going to share here with you now. And so once again, I don't know if you agree with me on everything here, and that's fine. You may or may not, but I'm going to share. I've really spent some time thinking about what are some of the disconnects that each group has about the other. And I'm just going to share them. And if you disagree, that's fine. If you agree, that's fine. If you have no comment, that's fine. So let's talk about on the school-based side. This is something I say to my families a lot. Let's say you're a teacher in a high school. And let's just say you teach U.S. history, and you love teaching U.S. history. You love it. It's your passion. This is what you wanted to do, and you're living your dream. And you're a pretty good teacher. And then all of a sudden, your principal taps you on the shoulder and says, I have great news for you. You're going to co-teach next year. We're going to put another teacher in the classroom with you. That's not necessarily going to be perceived as good news to every single teacher. It just isn't, right? Let's be honest, because the teacher might think, well, what if that person kind of wants to do things their way and I want to do things my way? And am I going to lose some of my freedom to implement things the way that I want to do? And I think that is part of the component that I think is the reality when a school-based counselor finds out that there's another counselor. It can be a lot like a teacher in high school that just got told you're gonna have a co-teacher in there with you for next year. What do you think about that illustration?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I've had other jobs where I'm not also doing this work, and that is a real feeling, right? Like and maybe it's just me personally, but sometimes that feeling can also just be like, oh, okay, I don't know how this, and so just sort of the unease of how will it go, and
Sure.
how will we best show up?
Sure. Who is this person? Will we get along? Will we have the same philosophy, or will we butt heads? So there's a little bit of that unknown. So I think it's important to just say that in the background, because I think that's something from my conversations with people that they oftentimes haven't heard until it's presented that way. So let me talk about some of the other things that I think create some tension from the school-based to the independent. So there can be a component, a little bit of a bruised ego. I think there can be a component of that. So it can be a little bit about like, gee, you've got me for free and I think I'm pretty good. You think I'm chopped liver that you have to go out there and pay somebody when you have me for free? Like, what do you think I am? Like, there can be that. And I want to put it in this context. When I was a school-based counselor, I had somebody confide in me, hey, I'm using an outside one. That was my initial, like, just unflinching reaction. My initial reaction was a little bit of a bruised ego. Like, gee, you have me for free, I'm available, and you still feel you need to get somebody else. So I do think that's part of the tension,
Yep.
whether, that's there. Another thing that I think is part of the tension is, and I'm just giving sort of school-based to independent now, is school-based counselors aren't paid that much.
No, we're not.
And they're not paid that much, right? And like, I mean, I know the pay's all over the place. I mean, you could be in a small little Christian Catholic school, you're really making 30, 35,000, or maybe you're somewhere else maybe you're making six figures.
You could be at a very expensive independent school and be making less than the tuition it is to go there.
Yeah, yeah. And so one of the perceptions that's out there, and a lot of it is because of the media, is that all of these independent counselors are getting like six figures from one family because, let's face it, it gets clicks for the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times. They run all those articles about those crazy expenses that some places charge. And I do feel like that colors the perception of IECs. And I do think that can add to the tension. It's
Yes.
like, I'm getting this and that part. Like, I think there can be some jealousy that can come from that. And also some stereotyping that I'm working with someone that's making $350,000, like, and I'm here working like a slave doing all this. So I think that's part of the tension from the school-based side. And then I think some of it is some of the stuff we did bring in already, which is sometimes the independent can say things that can make the job harder for the school-based. I think that's just a reality. It could be anything from, I don't really think you should look at that school, or no, that school's a probable or likely for you, and it's different maybe than the school-based perspective, or whatever it is. There can be tension points in the advice that feels like it's making it harder for the school-based to do their job, because not all the information that that's getting funneled to the student is consistent. And so I think that's also a reality on the tension. I think there's. Is there any other things that I didn't mention there that you think we haven't talked about in terms of the tension from the school-based to the independent, Julia?
I think that pretty much captures a lot of the things that swirl around, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's other things we could say, but I don't want to stereotype independence, right? Like, there's the independent that says, oh, they don't know what they're doing over there or whatever. But most people, I feel, at least the people I network with, try to be professional and try not to make those kinds of statements. Not to say that hasn't happened, but so, certainly the people, let's just put it in the category of people having bad experiences overall. And it could be a litany of a number of different reasons that, so there could be that. Now, from the independent to the school-based, I feel like there's tension because I feel like there is just the perception the independents have the perception that the school-based doesn't really think I have anything to offer, just assumes right from jump that I have nothing to add and I can't be of help to the student. And I feel like that oftentimes is perceived as the starting assumption. And that can feel very, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost infantilizing, really. But I mean, it really can feel just diminishing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, here's how I will experience that sometimes. So when I was on the school-based side, I'd get invited to every imaginable kind of thing from colleges, fly-in programs, everything. Now there's some of them that won't even let you sign up for counselor webinars and workshops.
Right. Yeah.
And the way it can feel, having been on both sides, but the way it can feel is, why can't you accept the fact that there's some good school-based counselors and there's some bad school-based counselors, and there's some good independents and there's some bad independents? And why can't you use your own discrimination to figure out which ones you feel you can trust? Why do you have to take one broad stroke of the brush and group everybody together? And so, why is the assumed position, I have nothing to add, and therefore, if you don't even want to talk to me, that feels very diminishing, because it's like saying, you don't even know me and you think I have nothing to add. And so that creates rift between the independent to the school-based, because
Totally.
you're not even giving me a chance.
Right.
You're just immediately stereotyping, you're an independent, you're up to no good, you have nothing to add, I don't want to do anything to do with you. And I think that's a lot of the tension.
If I were on the other side, if I were an IC, I would absolutely. And then I worked with a student who had a school that had an explicit policy of you should not, or I would absolutely walk away with that feeling. Yes.
Yeah. And I really think that's a lot of the tension that IECs have. Why is the default, I can't add positive contributions? Why does that have to be the default?
Right.
Anyway, I feel like I'm dominating this conversation, Julia. Anything else you want to say that I haven't shared?
I think something else we really and we did touch on it, but just to be more effusive, is that I think the context of the tension, I think, is general, right? I think the context of the choice of what you end up doing for a child can make the tension, or I think there are places where that, as you mentioned, that an IEC is always going to be, or a good IEC will always add right to the school-based counselor or potentially go in. So just wanted to be clear that when you're talking about a situation of which the here, let me try to rephrase this more, just that the context of the supports you need, I think, should more dictate the choice of if you have an outside counselor. And I would hope that also that in something that, that comes up a time and again is also that I think on the school-based side, perhaps we also need to really think about, as much as and as much as it's hard and harsh for what I said, some of these policies are in place because more often than not it has not worked out. But I do really wonder if there is a more open door between collaboration, removing sort of those barriers at independent schools that say, if you work with either they say we discourage working with one, which would, I think, I hate to say it, it's happening no matter if schools like it or not. So I think that we need to embrace, and instead of making both the IEC and the student feel like I need to be secretive, I can't collaborate. What do I do if there is inconsistencies between my school-based counselor and IEC? I think a lot of the time I do hear from other school-based counselors at hyper selective independent schools that I am at, where you do have counselors that their primary job, and they have low caseloads, is literally to do everything that you would need them to do. I do also hear from them, even when they've had bad experiences as I've had, that they would love to just collaborate all the time. It's much better. That's the much better way to go than just, as you said, Mark, just sort of being like, nope, putting down the roadblock. This is what it is, black and white. So, and I think just not only does that lead to that tension that you're talking about, but it also really doesn't serve the student. It really doesn't. So if both of everyone's goal, schools especially, at the end of the day, is to serve a child, I do think we need to really remove some of those policies and barriers that absolutely add to that tension.
No, I think my single biggest criticism of school-based is when they have the policy of, we discourage it, we're not in favor of it.
Yeah.
And I don't think it helps the child because, for one, parents are going to do what they believe is in the best interest of their student, and they're going to hire IECs.
Yep.
And, it could be for any of the reasons that we've said already. And some of them, like I said, I find a lot of times they want to start earlier, or they want to be able to have a 10 o'clock meeting or work on Sundays or whatever. Some of them are very good reasons, and they're going to do it. And so by you just shutting the door, you're really contributing sometimes to getting different pieces of advice because you haven't provided a platform. And I really think that what school-based counselors need to do as a philosophy is to have a process of, we're going to give an IEC a shot and a chance, and let's make the assumption initially that, one, this person has something to add, and two, it's going to be in the benefit of the student if I know what each side is saying to each other.
Right.
That should be the assumed position. That should be the default. And then if it reminds me. So I remember in 2012, I was at Pomona visiting, and Pomona kind of had this policy back then, like, we don't work with IECs. But then I had IECs at Pomona that were working with me. And then I said, and I really want to tell you, I really appreciate you working with me because I know your policy. And then a person was like, yeah, that's kind of our policy, but we individually have the ability to find people that we trust and work with them on an individual basis. And I think that school-based counselors can do that. Like, they could, on an individual basis, and there are some that do that. Like, there are some that will say, these are ones that we're comfortable with, based on, you kind of in some ways have done that, Julia, within your own sphere. Like, if you need to refer, you have your group of people that have proven themselves to.
I have a running list. I copy and paste.
Yeah. So I do think that's the single biggest thing that I would challenge school-based to is, don't just come up with that policy because it's not helping kids. Because I'm telling you, people, how you said to me, you like probably more than 50% of people have IECs,
right?
That you think? I bet it's higher because you're not going to know every single time.
No, I really do think it's close to 50. I'm now finished my 10th cycle, and I would say 50 to 75% of my students have an IEC.
Probably the single hardest question that I ever get is when somebody says to me, should I tell my school-based counselor that I'm working with you?
Right.
Because, there's even language in our guidelines, professional guidelines that we have, the different organizations that try to have some quality control out there. Like, we're not supposed to disclose to a school that you're working with an IEC unless the parent gives explicit permission. Because like, I would be naive to say to someone, like, it may not hurt you in some instances. Right? Like, there can be some resentment, or why should I offer you services if you already have help or whatever? So, but now you feel really icky doing an incognito thing. But at the same time, if you feel like you have something to add value, and if that's been proven over the course of your career that people feel like you have value and they come back and hire you with second and third kids, like, I don't really feel it's fair for the IEC to just turn all that business down just because the school tends to frown on it. But it's really a tension point.
And I really don't even have a good answer there, because
it's really hard.
It is really hard. On this flip side, I think about, usually we keep families together as counselors at independent schools, right? So maybe if a family doesn't like working with me, they will request someone else the next year. But I also love I just like recently had dinner with a mom of 3 kids I had, and it was so lovely being with that family the whole time. And I would hate to rob that experience from an IEC as well.
Yeah, I mean, people are going to do what they believe is in the best interest of their kids. And generally, when you tell them you can't do this thing that's in the best interest of your kids, it's not going to go well.
No.
It's just, they're just going to keep it undercover.
No.
So I really think, like, to be honest, even if a school feels like there's an IEC with a bad reputation or I don't like the advice they're giving, I still think it's better for the school-based counselor to know what's being said.
Yeah, and I don't even know how, I also think, there's a little bit of a judgment call. Like, I might, for example, I'll be honest, like, there have been times I've worked with an IEC and I would love for them to come present something to my office or talk to someone else. And my colleagues are like, nah, we're good. Thank you very much. And so I do think it's hard to sort of come up with a list or like vet, who you'd want. So I think the simpler solution is just that, like, let's all be in this together. So that way it's least, if your primary concern, or I'll say this, as a school-based counselor, my primary concern is that there will be ill advice that will drastically impact the student's progress in the process. But that's going to happen whether I know about it or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can actually, I think in some ways, usually I like asking my students up front. I tell them the reason I'm asking is because I would prefer to collaborate. I don't want you to feel stuck in between. I don't want you to feel secretive. And this is great. You've got 2 people on your team, right? And I really should say team or partners instead of sides here. I really should say that. And it's mostly just because I don't want them to feel secretive about it, because I think the IEC, understandably so, feels like they should be secretive and then tells the student that, and then everyone just feels badly about it, right? But there's also, I got to tell you, it's really bad when I find this out in September of the senior year, right? It's so much easier if we could just start on the ground level together and working with the students, so that way anything that might come down to the pike that is not going to work super well for the student is going to emerge earlier in the process.
Friends, I am adding an additional insert here. Just a thought I had post-production that I'm hoping could help IECs. Let's say that you are an IEC, and let's say, like me, you have made the decision that you will work with families at independent schools. Some of my friends who are IECs that came from the school-based side refuse to work with students at independent schools. And I have a lot of respect for that as well. I've not taken that position. So let's say you've taken my position and you do want to work with students at independent schools. I want to share something that can increase your value to the school-based counselor, even if you're a newer IEC. I imagine some of our talk about experience could be intimidating. If you're newer and you think, what am I, chopped liver? I have nothing to offer. So the first is this: you have to put yourself in the mindset of a school-based counselor. And I think the best way to do that is just to understand how you may feel or react if you found out that a family hired a second IEC, just so they could get a second opinion on your advice. You would be probably wondering things like, is their advice on essays going to contradict mine? If I'm saying Brown is an unlikely or long shot, are they going to tell them, you have a good shot at Brown? Are we going to be congruent? Is it going to help the student the most? And let's say you're charging $5,000, let's just say. And let's say you find out the family paid $15,000 or $20,000 for that second IEC. Once again, just a real tough pill to swallow. Part of it is ego. Part of it is partly because you don't want the kid to feel like a ping pong ball torn between conflicting advice. Let's say the family asks you if you will coordinate with the other IEC and you agree. But you're not getting paid for this additional work. And if you're at some of the most selective schools in this country, day and boarding, where more than half the students have IECs, that's a tough pill to swallow. Do you have to work with somebody from the outside for 50 or 60% of your caseload? That's a lot of extra work. If you're at a boarding school that uses the triple threat model, you may be coaching, teaching a class, having dorm duty, in addition to your counseling load. No big deal if it's a one-off, but what if it's 30 families? It's a tough pill to swallow. Now, let's say in your coordination, let's just say the subject of Georgetown comes up. And let's say it's obvious that the more expensive IEC has only placed one kid at Georgetown in their entire career. And let's say you've placed 20 or 25 kids at Georgetown. Having this understanding is going to make it more effective for you to work with your IEC. It's a tough pill to swallow. It's a big ask. So then what can you do to build value and bring value? So the analogy ends here. I'm going to transition to working with the school counselor for the rest of it. One is you can agree to be bad cop. You can ask the school-based counselor, are there any schools on the list that you feel very confident Johnny's not going to get into? And would you like for me to try to help counsel them out of applying? That would add great value and make you a valued partner. If you understand all of this, you won't approach the school-based counselor with an attitude of entitlement or the attitude that says, if you don't work with me, you're not being student-centric, being self-serving or insecure or not valuing me. So just having that mindset is going to help you a lot. Now, that was not the thing I was talking about to really add to your value. The thing that I have found that has helped me the most, more than any one single thing, when I work with school-based counselors to add value and for them to see it as a good partnership, is for me to help the counselor in predicting yield. Usually the IEC, but not always, is having more contact with the student than the school-based counselor. That is going to vary depending on the plan, the package, lots of circumstances, but often that's the case. So let's say you're talking about Clark University, and let's say you tell the IEC, let's say you say to the school-based counselor, I'm just going to be honest, the student has told me Clark's not in the top 5 and they're highly unlikely to go there. Dad doesn't want them going to Clark. This is enormously helpful to the school-based counselor because now they won't push Clark. And if it's a school that's still doing counselor calls, yes, there still are some that do that. And if an AO is fishing for yield information, the school-based counselor has a fuller context. So that's one way any IEC, no matter what your experience level, as long as you have accurate information, I have found can really add value to the partnership. Yeah, I have 2 final thoughts on this topic, Julia, and then see if there's anything else you want to say that you don't feel has been said. I know we said this before, but I can't emphasize it enough. I do feel like when I look at the tensions on each side, one of the tensions, and once again, I'm mostly talking about what I would call professional college counselors, people that have been on both sides of the desk, have done holistic admissions at highly selective schools. They've learned how tough decisions are made with really competitive applicants. Like that's really mostly what I'm talking about here. So I just want to emphasize that. I really feel a lot of times IECs don't, and this is not all, but it's more than I would like to see. I don't feel a lot of times that there's enough respect given to the fact that the school-based counselor has that's the school context that they have is incredibly valuable, and it's a piece that you just don't have, and you need to really have a lot of deference for that. So that's like one thing I really want to emphasize. I think that's a big part of the tension is not feeling like I know the context. Whether it's counselor calls or school visits or historical data that you can't even pick up from, you don't know everything from looking at a score or a Naviance grid that the school has. Like you may think you do. Sometimes a little knowledge is very dangerous. The school has tons more knowledge behind that about things. And so I think that's a big part of the misunderstanding. But this is the last thing I want to close with. So, I've been around hundreds and hundreds of IECs and hundreds of school counselors, maybe thousands.
Yeah.
I feel like both groups are very similar from a standpoint of their motives. Most groups, I feel like all that talk that you get in the paper about so-and-so charges 6 figures or 7 figures or something, it skews the perception of IECs. Most IECs are just like school-based counselors. Like they love kids. They love counseling. They love helping. And they went in it to this profession to help kids, serve kids, make a difference in the lives of kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't always feel like school-based counselors give IECs the benefit of the doubt of that's their motive.
Yes, I think you're so right. And I need to do better on that as well too. In fact, a lot of my good friends have become IECs from
from the roles we had. And a lot of it was also because it allows them to have a better life. And I cannot also, I cannot. So for a lot of my friends, we are first generation, we are women, we are maybe a little younger in this profession. The ability for them to actually maybe get paid a little bit more for their value, and also to have flexibility to raise their children, or honestly, like, I have a lot of stress. I'm sure ICs do too, yes, but like, I stay up at night before Ivy release day. I'm just so nervous about student reactions, and also the state of the world and things like that. So to be able to do the work you love, get recognized well for it, get compensated well for it, but still do everything else you love, is also something that's really powerful and important, that I should also really mention as well.
No, well said. You know what, Julia? I want to close with an email that came in, and I've shared this with Julia. We both kind of feel it really understood both sides really well. And it's from Chris Tier, who, if you've been hearing, our Monday episodes for the last several weeks, Chris has been on there. And Chris has a really interesting perspective because he's wore all the hats. He's been a school-based counselor for a really long time. He's also been an IEC, and he also did admissions. So he's kind of wore all the hats. And so having done that, I really feel he gets the different vantage points and the different perspectives, that people have. And so I want to read, with his permission, a portion of what he said. And I'd like to kind of close with this because I think his email really captured, and Julia agrees, it really kind of captured a lot of the misunderstandings. So I'm reading this with Chris's permission. Hi, Mark. And once again, now this came in right after part 1. In fact, literally, you must have just listened because it came in at 10 a.m. on Monday. Or 10 a.m. on Thursday, after it went live. So here's what it says. Hi, Mark. Listening to today's episode, great conversation about independent schools and IECs. Really can be fraught. Quality and experience in the IEC are essential. Open communication with a receptive school counselor can make collaboration work, but it is extra work for sure and can be counterproductive. So he's just bringing out all the nuances, which is great. You are right that there is a low bar for IECA membership. I think certified educational planner process provides some additional validity. And then he goes on to say, part of the tension around independent counselors is that virtually anyone can set up shop. No licensing is required, and some counselors are simply Ivy League graduates who ace college admissions themselves. Since the Varsity Blues scandal, membership has risen in the professional organizations like ICA, National Association for College Admission Counseling, which vet members and set ethical standards, as counselors have sought to add a good housekeeping seal of approval to their resumes. Some seek out certified educational planner, which requires passing an exam demonstrating experience in the field. And it goes on to say, these markers may be important for a parent to look for when shopping for a counselor, as experiences in either college admissions or high school counseling. When working with a child who's on the cusp of becoming an adult, that's a significant relationship, Tare says. There are people in the independent consulting space who literally got started as a parent at the kitchen table. They helped their own kids get into college and decided they know how it works. They haven't worked with anybody else's kids. They haven't worked in an admission office. They haven't worked in a school office. I get it, but they've got a long way to go to develop the more powerful sense of different colleges and different processes that are going to work for different kids. As an independent school counselor, I always address the issue from the perspective of, in one form or fashion, you have already paid tuition for the service of a comprehensive college counseling. We have manageable caseloads, a course that covers all aspects of the college process, and we're available for you and your child whenever you have questions. I did not prohibit outside help. I was always open to communication, and I asked families to please tell me if they're working with someone else. I know some did. I assume some did not. at my last school, I had a wonderful and often hilarious relationship with an IEC. Now that I'm an IEC, I have had a very open collaboration with college counselors at independent schools. One aspect that can also be true of independent school college counselors is that some are very young, straight out of highly selective admissions, sometimes their own alma mater, but they have not had time to visit enough colleges to know places that might really make sense for the student in their care. IECs always need to be respectful of school counselors and urge the students and parents in their care to build those relationships in advance of recommendations and school reports in particular. But there are times when IECs really do know more than the college counselors, even in strong independent schools. Let me know if there's anything else I can do to be of help to your listeners. So Chris sent that in after segment 1. I don't want to say, anything about whether he liked segment 2 or segment 3, but I just thought he added something of value there, having wore all the hats and able to see all perspectives. But thanks, Julia, for helping me try to unpack all the nuance.
Thank you as well.
All right. We'll see you next week. Okay, let's transition to my interview with Greg Zaiser of Elon University on demonstrated interest.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, this is the kind of interview I get very excited about. It's my interview with Greg Zaiser. I think I've explained this before, but I assume a lot from our audience. I assume that you can really handle some advanced conversations. So in preparing a podcast, I think of people who have been doing this work 4 and 5 decades. And I ask myself, can I have an interview in a way where I think even a very experienced person's going to learn something? I mean, it feels like the worst thing in the world someone could ever say to me is I never learned a single thing from your episode. But at the same time, let's say you just come here from another country and you don't really know anything about the U.S. system. It would be a travesty for someone to say there was all this inside baseball talk, all this terminology being thrown around. Like, I didn't know what you were talking about. Like, that's the goal. That's not the goal either, right? Or maybe word it more positively. The goal is to reach the neophyte and the most experienced vet. And I think this interview does it. I think Greg shares some things that will be new knowledge for everyone, no matter how experienced you are. And I have to give a shout out to Greg because that really comes from his willingness to be vulnerable and be transparent in a way not everybody is. One of the things I don't like, one thing that really grinds my gears is when I'm interviewing somebody and they're incredibly guarded and I can't get anything other than PC talk out of them. That is not Greg Zaiser. So I think you're going to enjoy this. It's a 2-parter, doing a deep dive on why Elon uses demonstrated interest and how Elon uses demonstrated interest. In part 1, Greg shares his backstory, and you will see he really knows Elon well. Then Greg shares why demonstrated interest is of great value to Elon. Greg and I talk about the value of early decision at Elon. Greg shares whether he thinks early decision will continue to spread amongst public schools. We talk about Michigan's decision. Greg shares how joining the Common App has impacted Elon. Greg answers the question, would he like to see more students apply early decision to Elon? Greg talks about early action and Elon's yield in early action. Greg gives Elon stats for early decision, early action, and regular decision. Greg talks about whether students that do virtual visits and in-person visits are more likely to enroll at Elon. What does the data show? And he talks about whether that's factored into their DI projections. Greg explains how AI is used or not used when it comes to tracking demonstrated interest. And he talks both at Elon and a little bit of a survey from him talking to other professionals in the field. Greg talks about whether a student's web traffic on the website is a factor when they're looking at demonstrated interest. Listen and enjoy. Friends, super stoked today. I'm here with Greg Zaiser from Elon University. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Greg.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so Greg, give us your backstory. And Elon has to be a good place because you've been there a long time. But share anything you think really help for our listeners to know the context from which you're going to speak.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Mark. Well, yes, I have been at Elon a very long time. I've just started my 36th year at Elon. I'm an alum, and oftentimes in the world of enrollment management, you have people like myself and a few others who have been at their institution for their whole career. And then, of course, a lot of folks will move around. And I think there's opportunity and advantages for both. But I never really thought I'd be at Elon for as long as I have. I just have found it to be a terrific place of great opportunity, professionally and personal growth. I will tell you, I'm a native of southern New Jersey. I came to North Carolina almost sight unseen, because back in those days, the college visit experience was quite different than it is today. And I know we'll probably talk about that. I chose Elon to study one thing, and of course changed my major like many people do. Ended up getting my graduate degree from Elon as well, so I have 2 degrees from the university. And then my oldest son, is also an Elon grad. So I have the lens of alum, staff member, and Elon parent. And I hope that that's helpful. I do find that in my daily work, having been a parent, of a student at the university, quite frankly, I learned a whole lot about my alma mater from that experience. And so, having said all that, I just know that my lens on the university is pretty broad, and I think there's value in that. I will just say this really quickly. I often tell the staff that when we are working with families, we are working with the 2 most important things in people's lives: their children and their money. And because it's a huge investment, right? It is obviously an incredibly valuable investment, but it's also just something that I think our staff, because they range in levels of experience and years of experience, don't always think about that. And I think there's value in recognizing that we're all people and we're all coming at this from different perspectives.
Thanks for that, Greg. And I know some of our regular listeners are thinking, where's Dr. Lisa Ruff, Elon's biggest fan? So this time just didn't work for her, but she did send in some questions that I'll relay to Greg. So we're going to break this up into 2 segments. We'll start out talking about demonstrated interest, and then we'll do a deeper dive into Elon. So, we do get new listeners all the time, Greg. Let's not assume anything. Why don't you give your definition of demonstrated interest and then share why Elon believes in using demonstrated interest?
Sure. Yeah, so demonstrated interest is something that, as many know, a lot of admission offices, and particularly this day and age, are interested in, because what we're trying to do is understand who most wants to be at our institutions. Why is that important? Well, one, we talk a lot about fit, but I think what's more important is that if students can show us that they have identified what we have to offer as valuable for them, and we are able to offer them admission and enroll them, they are likely to graduate, retain at a higher level, and graduate in 4 years. And when we talk about value in higher education, there's no question that it is a combination of a number of things. Outcomes being chief among them, but also we're in this world to focus, when I say world, in higher education, Elon has long been focused on making this a 4-year transformative experience. And by our understanding who has genuine, or as genuine as we can ascertain, demonstrated interest in the university, I think we can be successful in identifying the students who will be the most successful here and then after Elon.
So I often differentiate between DI and DU, right? DU, demonstrated understanding, you get who we are, you're aligned with our mission. DI, LTE, likelihood to enroll. So I'll probably stay in that, LTE, likely to enroll lane. So some of the most common ways, obviously early decision, sort of the ultimate trump card, right? Anything you want to say about that, the value it serves the institution?
Sure. I mean, I think early decision is an opportunity for a student. I obviously know that it's not for every student, even that student who has identified Elon as the place where they absolutely want to be, because the majority of families with an investment like this are not able to commit as early as maybe they would like. But I do think for a family or a particular student, it does create a nice pathway for them to the university. And of course, that's a smaller pool at most institutions. It is at Elon than our other 2 deadlines for admission.
Yeah, I want to get to some of the other ways, but I do have a question for you. I'm sure you saw the news about Michigan yesterday. Everybody did. Come as a surprise to you or not?
Not especially.
Yeah, not for
Not
me
especially.
either.
Yeah.
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 Do you think it will reverberate? The only surprise for me was that the announcement was so late. It's pretty late to be finding out almost mid-July. Um, but we've seen Connecticut, Vermont, Virginia, many schools in Virginia. And this kind of, I think, dovetails into a lot of what we're going to talk about. Well, first, let me ask you this. Do you think the trend will continue with Publix?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
So maybe you can explain why there's more of an incentive maybe now than before. Like, what are the things you're seeing on your side that make a tool like that maybe even more valuable than 20 years ago?
Make the early decision tool
Yeah.
more valuable?
Yeah.
Sure. I think my lens on this is maybe a little different than some of my colleagues in that Elon joined the Common Application in 2021. So that was not all that long ago. By the way, it also combined with the pandemic. So that was an interesting time for us, for sure.
Sure.
But the reason I make mention of that is our applications, and we knew this was going to be the case, our applications grew by 70% in 2 years. And that's a lot. And so when your applications go from 10,000 to 18,000, or almost 18,000 at that point in time, it becomes increasingly difficult to know who is really serious and who is just taking the path of least resistance. And I'm the first one to say, naturally, that 94% of our students use the Common Application now. So, and it makes the most sense, right? Because, it is, again, a path toward, and that's why we joined the Common Application, because we become more accessible to students. So I think as, what we're always hearing today, of course, is that there are more students applying to college, or more college applications. So each year in the fall, we hear X school is up this percentage in applications. And we all know that there aren't more students. There are just students applying to more schools. So having said all of that, what happens is it becomes increasingly challenging to identify the students who have a level of interest and who are just submitting another application. So early decision becomes one method of our being able to select candidates who have said to us in a, quite frankly, very tangible way, yes, this is where I want to be. So I believe that early decision certainly has its merits. I also think that as an institution with less than 25% of its first year class coming from early decision, we are serving a population without disadvantaging the majority of students. So it serves the university, it serves students, but it doesn't necessarily disadvantage students who can't select into that. So it's a tool.
Now, can I ask a follow-up on that?
Sure, yeah.
So one response could be that's our commitment. Like there are some schools, I remember when UVA, when in 2019, and we had Greg Roberts on talking about it. It's like, look, we're not going to take more than 35% or whatever. But then another argument would be, we're at 25%, so that's a good way of presenting it, boy. But we sure would be happy to be at 50 if we could maintain our quality. So would you say aspirationally you'd like to be higher than 25, or would you say that's a commitment to kind of be around there? I see them as different, right?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked, Mark. And I'm going to be honest with you. Yes, we would like it to be higher.
Sure.
Because the volatility in the early action pool and the regular deadline it's diminished if you have a larger portion. Honestly, I think as a professional and as a parent, if your early decision becomes greater than your non-early decision, then there's ultimately some potential for disadvantage for students, and we don't want that. But we also know that if you have a higher percentage of early decision students in your class, it creates greater opportunity for you to be more selective in the other pools.
Sure. Let's talk about early action. Do you have a higher yield in early action than regular?
We have historically not had a higher yield in early action. So early action is huge at Elon and continues to grow. In fact, we've offered it for 15 years, and in only one of those years have we seen a decline in early action. So it just keeps growing, and this year was a year of growth as well. I often say to families when I meet with them, what's the opposite of the word early? And they say late. And I say regular is not late. It's okay to apply regular.
Right.
But I also know in the age of social media and all the conversation, students are applying earlier and earlier. And I understand that. If I was in their shoes, I would as well. But because of the volume in early action, and I mean, for example, this year, 14,000 students applied early action, and about 3,500 applied regular deadline. So the regular has historically had a higher yield.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk. This is always a little tricky because a lot of times, chief enrollment officers like you kind of want to be transparent, but I don't necessarily expect you to reveal all the secret sauce because people can totally game the system. So you can let me know sort of how transparent you want to be. And also feel free to speak sometimes for the industry if you're not necessarily speaking for Elon and your knowledge of the industry. So I'd love to talk about some other ways in which schools can track demonstrated interest or can factor it into their predictive modeling and just kind of get your take on the value that you see to it.
Yeah.
So let's start out with one, both in-person visits and virtual visits. Your thoughts on that as it relates to DI.
Yeah. So in-person visits are without question. I mean, obviously we all want students to visit us in person. There's probably no better way to understand a university. However, I say that in that, we have a lot of visitors in the summer, and it's pretty quiet around here in the summer. And we have we're open every Saturday for visits, and our busiest day for visits is Saturday. So, you can get a really good overview of the university, but it's not the same as it is if you come during the fall when, in the thick of life on a university campus. It's your question about virtual versus in-person. We would prefer in-person, but we also recognize as Elon, so we have students from 50 states, and we recognize that as our recruitment broadens across the United States and across the world, there are students and families who simply are not going to be able to visit for any number of reasons. I will tell you that the majority of students, as we look at this, I think something about 85 to 90% of our incoming class this year has paid us a visit. Maybe not before they were admitted.
Right, pre-application or admitted student. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's one of the things that we've seen. So the short answer to your question is we prefer an in-campus visit, but we also recognize, given our recruitment footprint and our national and increasingly international reputation, that that's not going to be possible. And so we are factoring a virtual visit. We have not changed our opportunities for virtual visits. We scale them back a little bit, but we still offer them routinely, comparative to the pandemic when all of us went full steam ahead on virtual visits.
I know if I were to ask you, do you have a higher yield for in-person visits before the application compared to people that didn't? I know the answer is yes to that. But do you also see a higher yield from people that visited virtually versus people that didn't? Do you see any correlation there?
We do. It's a slight correlation. I mean, yeah, it's a definite correlation. It's nowhere near the same as
Sure.
And honestly, having done occasionally I'll do those presentations, and occasionally I'll participate in another presentation. Mm-hmm. They are so very different. I mean, I like to ask high school counselors and college counselors what makes a really good virtual visit, and I think they appreciate the question because they've seen a lot, and they've seen a lot of not so great. And they can really talk about some of the ones that are really particularly strong. So, I don't think there's any comparison, but we want to make sure that we are doing what we can. And we do see a greater level of interest from students who do participate in those virtual things.
I'm assuming you're probably using a third party, like a human capital or somebody out there to help with predictive modeling, like I would say a lot of schools are. Is that fair assumption?
I would say to you, we do outsource some things, but for predictive modeling, we've really been working with our data analytics center here on campus. Yeah. So that's fairly internal. We started with the Martha and Spencer Love School of Business, which is the business school here at Elon, and that has extended beyond the business school to other areas of the university too. Also we have a director of AI integration, mm-hmm. and working with that team too to help us identify students.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because all the buzz, and it just makes perfect sense, is that AI, we're in the information age, and AI is empowering schools to have way more knowledge of students, I think, than they ever would imagine. I've interviewed several people that have said to me, it's kind of Big Brother creepy in some ways, to be honest, but it kind of is what it is, right? Would you say, well, I'll just ask it this way. Share anything you're comfortable sharing, how AI may be a tool that might help schools with demonstrated interest.
Yeah. I have to tell you, Mark, that I think that I'm not quite there yet. And when I say that, I don't think I'm alone in that. I often sit with colleagues at schools from all over the country. In fact, did just a week or so ago, and we had a very similar conversation. And I think we are in that. I think the public views us as being farther along, candidly, than we may be. Mm-hmm. And I think we all have aspirations of being farther along in that continuum than we are at this point in time. So I think the opportunity is there. Many colleges and universities use a particular platform, a CRM, that is beginning to develop more opportunities for us to engage with AI within our own framework. And I think that if you ask me that question a year from now, and definitely 2 years from now, I'm going to be having a very different answer. So I would say what the public thinks is happening and what is really happening may be farther apart than we might like it to be at this point in time.
And our listeners know you're talking about Slate. In fact, we're doing a session on Slate's new predictive tools they're talking about rolling out coming up here pretty soon. Let's just talk about some other things and, just get your sense on how widely they're used. So some schools talk about having their regional reps, their territory managers, get literally either a printout or access online to see the web traffic of people in the funnel, to see how much they're frequenting the website and where they're going. How common do you think that is?
I think that's increasingly common, for sure. Mm-hmm. I think more so than emails or things like that. I think we automatically sort of lean toward, well, a student who's really interested is going to be in regular communication with us via email. The reality is that understanding email traffic and understanding how many of our messages get just caught up in filters makes that far more complicated than you might otherwise think. I also know that students are not necessarily responding to email. Every time a student schedules a visit from the territory for which I have responsibility, I will email them in advance. It's a small enough territory. And I write them, and very occasionally do I hear back from the student. And I know why, because they think it's AI generated, or they think it's just not a personalized email. In this case, it's not. So I think, IP traffic and just monitoring what pages we know, on a regular basis, what pages, and it's very seasonal, as you might expect, right? Sure. So we know this time of year versus yield season in the spring versus application season, where we need to be making sure that the messaging is on point.
And is the research down to the point where when you see people frequenting certain pages, there's a good shot we're in the game with them? Like I'm thinking of myself in your role, and I'm thinking if I see people looking at a lot of cost stuff or, orientation, it just would make sense. Look, you're thinking about me in this light.
Yeah. And that helps us build communications too. I mean, obviously we want to be as proactive as we can, but a lot of times you have to be reactive, and over a few cycles you understand what messaging you might be able to anticipate needing. So for sure.
Friends, this concludes part one of my interview with Greg Zaiser on demonstrated interest. Greg's the Chief Enrollment Officer at Elon University. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part. On Monday's episode, we are talking about the tax bill that passed Congress in the context of the ramifications it has for higher ed. And we'll have part 3 of my interview with Chris Terr, where we cover a range of topics. And friends, remember, your attitude, not your aptitude, will determine your altitude. Before I say see you on Monday, friends, we have our Counselor Connect meeting, and it is this Sunday. Sorry, it is a week from Sunday, but I want you to get that on your calendar because we have Matt Bonser, Director of Admission at Colorado College, and Hillary Dickman, our own co-host, coming to talk to us about EAED and regular decision. They're always transparent. You're in for a real treat. We hope our Counselor Connect members will show up. And by the way, we really could use some more public school counselors, independent school counselors, and CBO counselors. See you Monday, friends. And that's our show. big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an admission officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our international admissions expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.